Mac?
Can I lower a little?
Huh?
Yep.
Okay, we'd like to welcome everybody here to our work session.
Okay. No,
Um,
we'll just go ahead.
This is
Yeah,
a
it's
little
okay, I'll just work this.
less formal than our regular commission meeting. This is where we have some discussion about what we might do in our commission meeting, but we welcome everybody here today. We have all three commissioners here. Brittany's online, Mac's here. We have people in the audience from Spanish Valley, and we have our attorneys here today too. So, first on our agenda is overnight rental accommodation, nightly and short-term rental discussion. Mitch.
I assume y'all got in your packets my handout.
It's right there too.
We got her.
Oh, okay. What I want to do is just kind of go over some very basic stuff. And I think Judge Cresswell him and I are kind of duplicating some of this presentation. But short-term rentals are not defined in the San Juan County zoning ordinance. The Utah statute defines short-term rentals as a residential unit or any portion of a residential unit that the owner of record or the lessee of the unit offers for occupancy for fewer than 30 days. So anything that's residential that's offered for rent for less than 30 days. So when we talk about short-term rentals, that's what we're talking about. As far as, the big thing about short-term rentals and why it's such a hot issue right now is they're money makers. These people down there are making tons of money, charging $500 a night. And if you add that up, it comes to quite a bit of money. Cons, obviously, these are normally associated with people who bring in 4x4s, razors, side-by-sides, trailers, motorcycles, lots of kids, party until wee hours of the morning, and other activities which are not activities normally associated in a residential neighborhood. As far as our zoning history, I thought I'd go over that with you. I know this is basic, but from the beginning of time till 1978, San Juan County did not have any zoning ordinance. In 1978, we adopted our first ordinance. In 2011, that ordinance was amended, and we had a new ordinance, which is still in play at this time. And Mac, I don't know if you can. I've got toward the end there. Yeah, Exhibit 1. You're going to have to put that down to like 10%, if you can. That's the current our current zoning map right there. And if you can maybe scroll up a little bit to see. So all that in yellow there is the A1 zone, okay? And as we talk about Spanish Valley, some new ordinances were passed. But that's the current zoning map for the 2011 ordinance. In November of 2019, we adopted what we call the Spanish Valley Development Ordinance, which is a sub-ordinance of the 2011 ordinance. And that's basically a picture of the zoning map in Spanish Valley under this 2019 ordinance. Now, I think most of you know the history behind that. San Juan County engaged Landmark Design to do a comprehensive study. It took them a lot of time, a lot of money to determine what the citizens of Spanish Valley and San Juan County wanted. Respondents, I think overwhelmingly, decided that they did not want a tourist business, including overnight rentals in their neighborhoods. They wanted something that would be more residential. So that's, I guess that's we're on number 3, the current zoning map.
Mitch, what does the yellow indicate?
The yellow is
It's the
Planned.
community.
Planned
yeah,
community.
that's planned community.
Okay.
Those are roads. But
This is the highway, arterial, connector roads.
Okay, right there where the airport is, that flat right there where you got your, what is that?
I think those are individual lots.
Okay, that's just still, yeah.
Yeah, that's just an
That's
overlay.
residential.
Yeah, yeah. And that's the prime area we're talking about is,
Spanish
It's up
Valley
there.
Residential.
yeah. Also, just so you understand, the county has been working on a comprehensive overhaul of the 2011 ordinance. That's been in play for some time now. I think the holdup on it is we're trying to get a map. And that's not going to take care of all of our problems, but that's certainly on the horizon that we should know about. So what's the practical effect? Practical effect is that as it relates to Spanish Valley, you go under the 2011 ordinance, which is the main ordinance, and then the Spanish Valley Development Ordinance also comes into play. And it has what we call overlay zones, which in 4 of the 5 districts allow short-term rentals, mostly along the highway, in the highway corridor. There's 5 zones down there. Yeah, you've got residential, business flex, highway commercial, and controlled district. All of those you can have short-term rentals. It's just in the Spanish Valley residential zone, which if you can go up, Mac, that's the light yellow. Anything up there in the light yellow. That's the area we're talking about.
And that is allowed overnight rentals or doesn't?
Does not allow.
Does not allow.
Yeah.
And that's what ordinance says right now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think that I just wanted to introduce. I've got the problems here, but I think Judge Cresswell.
But just one more
Yeah,
question.
go ahead.
Do you have any idea in that light yellow area how many short-term rentals exist right now?
Well, if you talk to people from Spanish Valley, it's like, I've sat in some meetings and we've had people say 78% of the occupancy permits are for short-term rentals in that particular district. Can you, let's go down to the map. It would be exhibit number, let's go to number 5. I thought I deleted all that, so you're going to have to go all the way to the end there.
Is it at the end of the zone?
That's the new county ordinance.
Okay. Let me try to get there.
A little bit more. Oh,
Petition.
okay, go up. This is the petition from Mr. Carroll.
This
Go
one
up,
right here?
go up a little bit keep going up.
To the petition?
Yeah, that's just a petition that I put in there by Mr. Carroll, with all those people that basically are saying something's got to be done.
I added an updated version of this,
Okay,
kind of give you an idea.
all right. Let's go back to. I've got a map in there that shows.
Now,
Is this what you added?
This is what I added. This is from them to give you a sense of
Oh, from you guys? I didn't see that.
all of the Airbnbs in his neighborhood that surround him.
Yeah.
That's
these
not all of Spanish Valley.
Property.
Just,
No, this is just
what do you call that? subdivision. there?
San Juan
General
Estates.
San Juan Estates?
Mm-hmm.
And they are coming in droves doing lot splits on here. He's highlighted a couple of these properties. They're coming in for a subdivision right now. This one's going to come in for a subdivision. These already have, and so there are a lot just in this little portion of that.
Mhm.
Now you multiply this across Spanish Valley, it looks about like that.
And then I thought, I just pulled these, tried to erase the addresses, but each one of these is just a listing. I mean, these people are just listing these on Airbnb and Vrbo. You can go down now.
You want me to go back down?
Yeah, I think that's pretty much, unless you guys have some questions.
I don't know if you wanted another map. Here's the,
Yeah, oh, go ahead, yeah, can you
zoom in there.
zoom in on that one? Right now, we have that light blue there, and once again, the light yellow is the problem area, you know. But that light blue is currently a subdivision, Balanced Rock Resort, that they've come in and gone through all the necessary approvals and so forth. But right there, they're putting in, I think that's 72 acres. And they're putting in somewhere between 250 to 300 homes in there. And most of those will be short-term rentals. So
We looked at this area right here. On that map.
yeah,
That's where the other
That's-
problem area, right?
That's where Ron
Yeah.
and those guys highlighted. Yeah.
so
That's
so
the
that,
same- That's the same amount Rim Village has on the same amount of property.
yeah.
They can control it.
So you're gonna have a lot of short-term rentals there in that area, but it's gone through the what we call the overlay.
It's gone through the proper
Yeah, it's gone
channels to
through the
get it.
proper channels. Okay.
So, Administrative Law Judge Cresswell. So my responsibility is to take a case on appeal administratively. So what I do is I deep dive into the ordinance and also make sure that I fully understand the facts. So I've had two cases I've decided. I've got two more that are actually pending. I won't talk about those. Those are still in process. The first case I heard and decided in April involved a short-term rental in the residential Spanish Valley residential area that started before the subordinance was passed. About a year before they started operating it. So the question in that case was whether or not that short-term rental was legal in the A1 zone before the subordinance was passed. And I concluded it was not, so it couldn't continue to operate as a short-term rental because it hadn't operated legally in the A1 zone. The next case I had was exclusively within the Spanish Valley residential district period of time. So these were actually two pieces of property built and developed after 19 November 2019. So that case focused exclusively and primarily on the subordinance, the Spanish Valley subordinance. Now, we mentioned the subordinance. Let me explain, make sure you understand. So the comprehensive zoning code you have that was passed in September 2011 is comprehensive, but included within that code are zoning We've got technology issues we're working on. By the way, we don't need that display at this point, for my presentation at least. So the 2011 zoning ordinance is a comprehensive zoning ordinance, but included in with it are chapters establishing and regulating zoning districts throughout the county. What the subordinance did, it replaced the zoning districts in Spanish Valley with some new districts, and that's all it did. So it's not a standalone ordinance. It's a subordinance in the fact that it created new districts. Actually, there were 6 districts created to replace 2 that had previously covered Spanish Valley. And so when we refer to the 2011 and the subordinance, they're blended together in that fashion. So the subordinance created new zoning districts, but didn't replace the other language and the other regulatory framework for 2011. So a question in zoning always is what's a permitted use, what's a conditional use, and what's a prohibited use? And the question is, are short-term rentals prohibited in the Spanish Valley Residential District? And that's something I had to wrestle with as administrative law judge. And I had to deep dive again into the ordinance and make sure I fully understood it. I had the benefit of opposing counsel, kind of raising the right questions. So I just didn't do this alone. I did it with the benefit of other attorneys that were directing me and advising me. But what I'm reporting out to you is where I ended up, and that's what was reflected in my decision. So your ordinance, the 2011 ordinance, has 2 ways to designate a use as prohibited. The first one is, so this is Lynn Cresswell's layman's term for you guys, so you don't worry about the legal jargon. But to me, the way the ordinance sets up that in a table of uses that's contained within a zoning district, if a use is not named, in other words, if it's omitted, then it's prohibited. So I call that prohibition by omission. Okay?
In essence.
And in the code, it's very specific. Any use that's not named in the table of uses is prohibited. So the first thing you're going to look for is, can you see a short-term rental in the table of uses? And we're going to get to that in a minute. There is in both the A1 zone and the Spanish Valley Residential District a permitted use for a residential dwelling for families, single family or 2-family dwellings. So you'd say, well, it's a dwelling and people are living in it. Doesn't really matter how long they live in it, etc. Well, then we go to the second aspect of trying to interpret your code, and it's called prohibition by exception. And the way this works is there are key terms or words that are used in your code that tell what something is, and they also tell what something isn't. For example, in your code, the word family and dwelling are both defined. And let me pull those up for you so I can read them to you. Dwelling, any building used for residential purposes except bed and breakfast, boarding house, lodging houses. Okay. Family, persons living as a single housekeeping unit as distinguished from bed and breakfast, boarding houses, lodging houses, etc. So what you've done is you've adopted a definition for family and dwelling that excludes certain uses by definition. Okay. Interestingly, the code also defined lodging houses as a building where lodging for 5 to 10 persons is provided for compensation. Not only I, but other courts here in Utah have found that lodging house is an equivalent of a short-term rental. Not exactly an equivalent, but it's pretty close to a short-term rental. So if you use your residential property for receiving compensation for 5 to 15 people for lodging. Lodging is a temporary transitory use. Then you're prohibited under the code. Okay, so that's some definitional context and where we're at. I made these notes now. I'm skipping around. I want to make sure I catch all of them. I get into this and I kind of okay. Okay, 2 zoning codes. I've covered that. Okay, so prior to the adoption of the subordinance was adopted on the 19th of November, 2019. A couple of things happened. The first significant thing was the Spanish Valley Area Plan, and Mitch mentioned that landmark design was hired by the county. I don't think I've ever seen, and I've been in local government for years, folks. I don't think I've ever seen a community outreach as significant as landmark design did. They held neighborhood meetings. They did workshops. They allowed people to comment online through a website or through email. They gathered an amazing amount of information from everybody, all the residents and citizens in Spanish Valley. What came out of that was a fairly strong request that tourist activities, including short-term rentals, not be included within the residential community. And when the final area plan was adopted, it included some guidelines. Now these are only guidelines. It's not legislative in any fashion, but guidelines suggesting that those kinds of tourist activities be outside of residential area, not included in the residential area. So after that area plan was approved, it was almost 2 years before the subordinance was adopted. But during that period of time, there was a significant amount of attention to what should our ordinance look like. Throughout that entire period, the ordinance that was drafted and eventually adopted by Bruce Adams and company did not include short-term rentals in the Spanish Valley Ordinance. What it did include, though, was...
I voted against it.
Oh!
He did.
My goodness, okay.
2-1.
Wow. I guess I should have read the record more carefully. I think you voted against it because there was some concern about what the Planning Commission wanted. The Planning Commission was trying to get some changes made to the ordinance, and you were aware that the Planning Commission's concerns were legitimate and they weren't being addressed.
What was mentioned in the by the other commissioners was just a preliminary plan. It wasn't a final plan. We were just looking at preliminary.
That was the map.
Yeah.
Yeah, it had to do with the map.
And I wanted a final
Right.
map
Right.
before we approved it, and they just went ahead.
No. I remember reading all that. What's happened, of course, is the map is something that can be amended, and you guys have been appropriately amending the map over time. So that that jogs my memory. By the way, I've read all of these things multiple times. Okay, so the interesting thing about the subordinance that sometimes people don't focus on is the subordinance provided a liberal opportunity for short-term rentals in Spanish Valley, just not in the residential district. So in 4 of the 6 districts, there was reference to short-term rentals. In fact, the term is all other variations of overnight accommodations for nightly rentals. And that was specifically called out and mentioned in 4 of the 6 districts. It provided it almost with open arms, build here, with the understanding that an overlay district would apply. So that an overlay district is merely a set of additional process that somebody has to go through in order to receive approval. But it's not a prohibition. It's not a roadblock. It's just go through these additional steps. The fifth district, which is your plan unit development district, also liberally opens with open arms, invites short-term rentals, but it does not have the overlay requirement because a plan unit development already has internal its own process. I mean, a public plan unit development is a very planning rich process that incorporates much of what's otherwise required in the overlay. So in my mind, the Spanish Valley Ordinance provides lots of opportunity for short-term rentals. Unfortunately, or for whatever reason, all the developers want to build it in the one place where it's prohibited in the short-term or a Spanish Valley residential district. So I think, let me go over my notes here and make sure I've got everything. Okay, so that's pretty much a summation of, well, let me step back on the interpretation of Spanish Valley Residential District. So the Spanish Valley Residential District does have a table of uses, and in the table of uses are single and two-family dwellings. And using the definition I explained before for family and dwelling, short-term rentals or lodging houses are prohibited by exception. Also, neither in the table of uses nor anywhere else in the chapter that addresses the Spanish Valley Residential District is this term or anything like it used. All other variations of overnight accommodations for nightly rental. Since that's not included, mentioned, or even suggested or inferred or anything else in that chapter, then short-term rentals are prohibited by omission. Okay? So that's where I ended up as your administrative law judge, is saying really they can't be there. Based on the code as I interpreted it.
And that's the kind of 10 area, that's the residential, right?
Residential.
On the map.
Well, again, I'll defer to Mac.
Yes,
Is that right, Matt?
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So anything in there, in
Yeah.
that 10 residential area, you're telling us that overnight rentals are prohibited.
Right.
Okay.
And again, he mentioned the definition, the state definition of short-term rental. He said it doesn't exist. It's true. Actually, short-term rental is used in the code under all other variations of overnight accommodations for nightly rental. So it's actually there, but the actual definition may or may not have been carried over. So to me, anything and everything that looks or smells like or might be or could be an overnight rental is prohibited, because all other variations of overnight accommodations for nightly rental are prohibited. Okay. So the next thing that happens after that is the county adopted a business license ordinance, and the business license ordinance says a couple of things. One, a business license cannot be issued in violation of the zoning code. In other words, if somebody wants to come in and operate a business and that business is illegal in that zoning code, then a business license can't be issued. Okay. Another thing that it says is there needs to be and I'm going to talk about this in a minute with both codes, this is both the zoning code and the business license code. There needs to be a proactive enforcement, and I think the business licensing folks have done a pretty good job of trying to identify where businesses are operating in the county and make sure that they understand they're required to get a business license, et cetera. So I think they've done a pretty good job. Where it broke down has to do with these particular properties, because there was some inexperience on both the zoning administrator side and on the side of the business licensing officials. They didn't necessarily appreciate all this stuff I'm telling you here as well as they
So
could have.
You think some business licenses were issued within? the
Yes,
facility?
I'm going to get to that. Right now I'm going over
Okay.
the legal framework, but then I'm going to walk you through the factual history.
Okay.
Factually, we are now in a better position than we were 2 years ago. But 2 years ago, we were in a really bad position factually, right?
Yes.
Yeah, we were not doing very well. But in both the zoning code, the 2011 zoning code, and the business licensing ordinance, there's an affirmative duty on behalf of the county to enforce both ordinances, to go out and find out where there's violations. And the county attorney is charged with seeking sanctions against business or property owners that are non-compliant with either the zoning code or the business license code. So let me. I'm going to set aside the ordinance analysis. I'm going to go into factually what we're looking at here. So again, I was faced with two cases that involved me to deep dive into the factual contextual context of what was happening, and I got emails, I got all kinds of affidavits, I learned as much as I could. I read reports. There were people in and out of this area doing studies, and I was reading as much as I possibly could. I did read some newspaper articles, but like most newspaper articles, they're kind of interesting.
Yeah. Especially for-
I don't rely on newspaper reporters to tell me what's really going on. I don't know whether you had any experience with that personally, but I have. Okay, so the problem early on faced by San Juan County was the inexperience of its staff that was responsible for this. And also, you did not have dedicated assigned people that were responsible for enforcement. In your urban counties, Salt Lake County, Davis County, Utah County, they have code enforcement departments. That's what they do. They go out and look for violations of the code, and there's an entire engagement process, but you don't have that. Either as a partial assignment or a full-time assignment for anybody. So because of that, there's going to be situations where violations of the code, either business license or zoning code, are not being taken care of. So in 2017, and this may be prior to this, but 2017 was where I picked up where there's all of a sudden a surge in short-term rentals in Spanish Valley, especially in the residential area, and there's a profit motive associated with this, but companies and individuals are buying property in the residential area with the specific purpose of building a really nice structure, sometimes one level, sometimes two, for the purpose of renting it out for tourists. And each year since 2017, there's been an increase in that activity in the Spanish Valley residential district. The question I asked myself, and what happened after 19 November 2019, with the passage of the ordinance, both the zoning administrator and some of the planning commissioners were asked the question, well, are we all right in building short-term rentals? And the answer they got was, sure. I haven't talked to any of them personally, and I didn't make them give me statements. But my guess is that they thought it was all right because the chapter in the subordinance related to Spanish Valley Residential District was silent. It didn't mention short-term rentals. So they said, well, because it wasn't mentioned, I guess it's all right. Well, again, because of lack of experience, they didn't understand how the code worked, and that a silence or omission is a prohibition. They just don't understand that. And these were good people. By the way, I was working for you guys in 2017, and I know all these people. And personally, they're good professionals. And so I'm just saying the situation was they didn't understand, and they communicated to property owners that, yeah, short-term rentals are all right. So the short-term rental construction continues after the passage of the 19 November 2019 ordinance. Also, you did not have a proactive enforcement program, which probably wouldn't have helped anyway, because you didn't understand your ordinances. How could you proactively enforce them? So residential began to build. Now, let me take a right step here, and I want to go back to what Mitch just said about the Balanced Rock Resort project. So, and you were involved in this, Commissioner Adams. From the 16th of February 2021 to the 30th of June this year, this commission has approved 9 projects for short-term rentals in Spanish Valley, within 4 of the zoning districts, for a total, and I've counted these up, 282 short-term residential room units are approved for Spanish Valley. So
Are those in residential areas?
they're not. They're in these 4 non-resident. Now, one of those actually has a residential component. One of those 4 is actually referred to as a mixed-use residential area. So these are approved, legitimate, and they're going to be paying taxes, and they're going to be having a business license. I mean, there's a lot of activity going on for those 282 short-term rentals.
Those
Okay?
are they all come under the overnight accommodation
Right.
process. And so they
So, I mean, I guess if, as your administrative law judge, if I would have looked at your ordinance and said, you know, they're discriminating against short-term rentals because there's no opportunity. No, you're not. You're not discriminating. You're just trying to manage it consistent with a policy choice that you made back in, well, at least 2 of the 3 of you made back in 2019. So, okay. Short-term rentals continued, and you asked me the question about business licensing. Unfortunately, in December 2020, when the business license ordinance passed, and there were still unsure, the county staff was unsure, letters went out to short-term rental owners in the residential district, inviting them to apply for licenses. Mm-hmm. And some of them applied for licenses and were given licenses. Mm-hmm. So now we're compounding the problem. Not only are we ignoring the zoning ordinance, but we're also authorizing them to continue. Interestingly, that didn't continue. So this is late 2020 and early 2021. And then there's a course of action to happen, and Mac was center stage of this, and I'm going to use Mac's name several times from here on out as the good guy in this process. By the way, Mac and I have known one another for a long time, and I have huge respect for Mac. Just say thank you to this guy a lot. He's amazing. He and I worked in Salt Lake City years ago. So on the 8th of March, 2021, Deputy County Attorney Alex Goebel published a legal opinion. And the question presented to him, are short-term rentals legal within the Spanish Valley Residential District? And he said no. And he did not use the prohibition by omission, but he used the prohibition by exception. He looked at the words family and dwelling, and saw that lodging houses, which were the equivalent of short-term rentals, were prohibited. And so it was his opinion on the 8th of March, 2021, that short-term rentals were were not authorized in the Spanish Valley Residential District. A few days later, on the 11th of March, and Mac was sitting in on this meeting, there was a mega planning commission meeting. I don't know, this is probably virtual because it was during COVID, but there were lots of property owners that showed up, and the discussion in that planning commission went on for almost an hour and a half, it started with Alex Goebel giving his opinion, and there was some exchange, and then property owners interacted with Alex Goebel, and eventually at the end of that discussion period, Mac says, we've probably made some mistakes here, but I'm going to own this. Any property owner who wants to meet with me, let's meet and let's figure this out. And so Mac offered his personal services to work with these property owners. It's my understanding that not all property owners reached out to you, but some did. So, but at least you were working with those who were proactive to come to you. So Mac was busy and I've got some of his email correspondence. He was busy with many of these property owners trying to figure out. And early on, he understood that if they started their business after 19 November 2019, they were not legal. But the question is, if they started their business prior to that, were they a legal non-conforming use? And again, it was that he didn't have all the information he needed, and he asked them to, bring forth any information they have. And he continued this engagement process all the way through 2022. But he was consistently telling anybody and everybody that would communicate with him that short-term rentals were not authorized within the Spanish Valley Residential District. Notwithstanding that, there were still short-term rental businesses being developed. A footnote to what Mac was doing, unfortunately, and I only have one occasion, reported occasion where this happened. The business licensing official, after Mac started telling people no, they're not authorized. The business licensing official was working with a property owner to try to consolidate a business license for a short-term rental. So we still had some residual for a short period of time. We had some residual kind of miscommunication between the county and property owners. But in my mind, that's completely resolved. It's not ongoing. But that's some historical context that allows you to understand kind of the dynamic that was going on, et cetera, during that period of time. So I've decided 2 cases. I got 2 more in front of me about short-term rentals in the district. I've told Mitch and Mac this. I feel uncomfortable, and I'm going to decline telling you what to do about all this stuff because I'm your administrative law judge. I'm very experienced in policy, and I've written policy for local governments for years, but I hesitate giving you policy advice because that's not my role in your jurisdiction. I'm your judge, administrative law judge, and I'm giving you the benefit of my research and background and everything else, but I hesitate to tell you what should happen next. But just 2 things as a conclusion. First off, there is success in Spanish Valley for short-term rentals. They're happening. The ones that are going through the overlay process and are in the appropriate zone are going to benefit San Juan County for a long time. The second thing, it's my understanding that overnight accommodations in the Spanish Valley Residential District are there, and they're in violation of both the zoning code and the business license ordinance. So I prattle on here for a while. I've tried not to I've tried to give it as I've seen it. Now, so what questions do you have? What have I said that's confused you? What door did I open that I didn't close? What? Any questions?
Jamie's writing notes, so he got a question.
And I've got a follow-up to his on maybe how to solve.
And then we also have Bart.
Yeah,
online
you're
as
going to
well.
be talking
He's
about
gonna tell us how to fix it.
well, there.
Shall we have a question after he does the?
It's up to you.
Yeah,
If
how-
you want-
Yeah, it might be better.
Yeah,
than-
then we'll have
Okay. If I can answer any of this, I'm glad.
Yeah,
to.
we'll just have question for both of you. Thank you.
Thanks, Mitch.
Use that. All right, so after all that, the question is, where do we go from here? How do we solve this? These are just some suggestions, very broad. Obviously, something would have to be worked out, narrowed down, but the first one is just keep the status quo. But let me also say this that I think maybe got missed a little bit is on the enforcement side, we've got all these down here, and since I've been here, we've litigated 2. And, you know, each one of these that we have to go through, Judge Cresswell spends a week and a lot of time, and, you know, he doesn't bill us for, if he billed us for all of his time, we'd really be in trouble, but he's very gracious. Has a very low billing rate, and is very conscientious on what he bills us. But still, each one of these is costing us a significant amount of money, and it's very time consuming. It would be easy to haul these people in, but we just don't have the capabilities to, you know, if we had 10 administrative law judges, we could probably do it. But we could, you know, keep the status quo, defend appeals of those who, I think, and let me also just make this thing, I think this really came to light after the passage of the business license ordinance, because that's for the first time allowed us to haul these people in and cite them with a cease and desist. And anyway, so one avenue is to those that are apply for a business license and are denied, we can defend those appeals. We can prosecute complaints by neighbors. And this is probably the big one. We could offer somewhat of an amnesty ordinance where those property owners who can prove that they were erroneously told by the county that they could operate the SDR be allowed to continue operating it, provided they come forward within a certain time span. This is kind of a standalone ordinance, probably. This is not a standalone ordinance. In other words, this amnesty ordinance, the purpose of it would be to go through and clean up all those people that the county said, yeah, you can. They relied on that. And now the county's coming back and saying, well, no, they aren't allowed. And we actually have one of those drafted up, an amnesty ordinance. But that would be used in conjunction with other solutions. The second one would bar STRs in their entirety unless they're in an overnight overlay zone, temporary or permanent. You could declare a moratorium on any new applications. You'd still have to clean up the existing by enforcement or legislation. And then what do you do after the moratorium? There would have to be an ordinance change to bar STRs, and then we'd just have to one by one ramp up the enforcement and weed all those out, which would be time consuming. 3, allow STRs in the Spanish Valley residential. Legislative change to allow STRs in the Spanish Fork residential zone subject to the overlay. In other words, allow them subject to the overlay ordinance. I don't think that would make a lot of the residents in Spanish Valley happy. And then 4, add additional restrictions. And by way of example, I've got them listed here. You could require a buffer between any vacation rental and residential property, a 2-year minimum ownership period, only 1 vacation license allowed on the property, complete eligible vacation license applications received on or before will be processed under the regulations in place prior to the new ordinance. Cap licenses at 10% of dwelling units. There's a list of them, and I just, we could add other restrictions. I've gone through these kind of fast because I don't know that, we're capable or want to come up with a solution right now, but maybe narrow it down and then focus on which way to go. Let me say one other thing is, I think the county, these people that run these vacation rentals are supposed to pay sales tax. I don't think any of these people that are doing this are paying sales tax and or the transitory room tax. So not only, we're missing out on that revenue as well.
Okay, so this kind of bridges back into Lynn's world. Could you tax them as a commercial business? Now, you have ruled that it's a single family dwelling unit. It's not a business.
So the term business is defined by Utah code, and when they start collecting revenue as a business, it's taxable. I'm not a tax attorney, and I'll
Yeah.
probably bring somebody else in on that. But
So could then you change that property status from residential
No,
to commercial? Or
People have made that argument. It's a good
Okay.
argument.
other states have that.
But the courts have ruled that that's just one factor to look at in deciding whether or not an ordinance allows STRs or not.
Okay.
maybe I'm misunderstanding the question. So throughout Utah now, there are home businesses. You live in your home and you run a business out of it,
Yeah,
right?
correct.
The question I thought you were asking me is, can you require the business activity in the home to pay taxes on its business? The answer is yes, even though it's in a residential property, and the property is still residential, not a business.
So the property would stay residential. It wouldn't convert to
Right.
commercial
But-
assessed value.
But in my mind, if it's not being used as a family dwelling in the Spanish Valley Residential District, then it's got to be a business. So,
And I think they
And-
tax that on whether it's occupied or not. In other words, if it's owner occupied, then I think the state looks at that and gives them that primary home
Okay.
designation.
Yes, that secondary or primary. Okay.
Right.
Yeah. Yep, you're right.
Yeah.
I have a question regarding the little footnote.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. That goes up with number 1, keep the status quo. If we can,
So, okay, my question is, if it's, the Spanish Valley is in the plan incorporating, do we have an idea? Are there in the plan? Is a wish?
I'd
Heard
defer
this
to
for-
Mac
we've
on
heard
that.
this for 2-3 years now.
Okay.
No
Big-
movement at all. So.
And I don't know how to say this without sounding I'm not being critical.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of like the little girl that said, want to know why the king said it has a a suit when he doesn't have. So I'm coming from that point, thinking I have lots of friends that write to me from Spanish Valley, and they seem to have desires and wishes for their community. And it, and for me, it would be so nice if it does a possibility for them to incorporate, become their own agency, and we probably can be better neighbors that way with them, because right now we're telling each other. Do you know what I mean? In a way or another. And it breaks my heart when I get those emails, because I know what their wishes and thinkings are, but I also know our needs. I also know that if we don't grow, we are dying. We are dying as a county. And basically, I'm the kind of person that like to go see where's the cheese. Okay, we have one slice of the cheese left in San Juan County for us to collect taxes, property taxes, and we have lots of service. Even with education, I counted that bus barnyard, whatever they call the bus yard where they have all the school buses. Between 80 and 90 buses that school district uses. We are a vast area.
Yeah.
We had to educate children. We had to maintain service, and we need that. We are not, personally, I'm not against the Spanish Valley people when they write to me and they wish I'd stop doing certain things. I'm looking for the cheese.
Yeah.
We had to feed lots of people, and our slice. I had a conversation with one of the commissioners, or whatever it's called, from Moab, and this person was kind of going that direction of us now, stepping on the people from Spanish Valley. And I sat on there and told our sad story. We are poor. And this person made a comment. Used to be the days when San Juan County was the rich county, and Grand County was the poor county. And so we're in that situation. I don't know what holds them back to do that, but I can see how that can be a solution. They can govern their land, whatever, that area, and then we can decide what to do, what's going to benefit the rest of the population, because we as a county cannot go back to the citizens that pay taxes for more money. Before I had this job, we were a retired couple, and we cannot keep making house payment. We are making house payment and I can never go back to the people I represent and say we need more. So we had to figure out how to grow the cheese.
Yeah.
And like I said, I felt it's so conflicted when I get sincere letters. I think it's sincere. What they want is sincere, but I cannot forego making a bigger slice of cheese. And so my question was, I just wanted to know what time frame. Is that something?
Well, I don't. I mean, I think everybody would agree with you that I think Spanish Valley would want to become their own city. We want them to, but the practical effect of creating a city is overwhelming. It's quite a process, and I don't think it's done overnight. But I think we're working toward that, but I don't,
So this option is not something that we can
I don't
think, well, they're almost there and we'll just.
Yeah.
So that was my clarification for that.
Let me also, I think Bart Kuntz is on the line. Before maybe we have any more questions, maybe we could ask him if he has anything to add. Are you there, Bart?
Yes.
Yes.
Hey, Bart.
Hi.
The only thing I really wanted to add is that I listened to Judge Cresswell's presentation, and I agree with him on the interpretation of the ordinance. I think that's defensible. And since I, handle some litigation for the county, that's going to be my perspective, is risk of litigation. And we have a couple of cases right now. I'm not going to discuss those to preserve the attorney-client privilege, but I think that something that needs to be added is that although the ordinance, I think, is defensible, we do have this situation where there have been representations to property owners that they can use their properties in the residential area for short-term rentals. And that presents an argument that they can use called estoppel, where they can say, since you told me I can do that, I should be allowed to continue doing that. It's a high legal bar. It has to be very clear and usually written. And so far, we've been successful in avoiding those kinds of arguments on appeal in litigation. But that is a risk of litigation that is out there that you should be aware of and should probably factor into your decision on what to do in Spanish Valley. It's a risk that decreases with time because of limitations periods. As we go on, the risk of that decreases, but it is a risk you should be aware of, and that's all I really wanted to add.
I've got a question for all three, maybe not Lynn, maybe two of you. It sounds to me like we're in not a very good defensible position on the short-term rentals that have been established within residential communities in Spanish Valley. If the commission chose to do so immediately and declare a moratorium on any short-term rentals in residential areas in Spanish Valley, would that be something that would open us up to a legal position that we couldn't defend?
Well, I'll defer to Bart on that as far as the risk analysis.
I mean, as far as the statute, I forget the exact words, but I think it has to be a compelling and countervailing reason to pass a moratorium. And so you would need to make sure that you are meeting that standard. It can't guarantee you're not going to get sued, but if you are, then you need to make sure that you have made findings that will meet that standard if you're going to pass a moratorium.
Well, I just think the commission has been put in a bad spot because of staffers that have been uneducated or didn't know about the zoning that was going on down there, and given permission when they shouldn't have given permission.
Right.
And so it puts the commission in a bad spot now because we've got all these short-term rentals that have been established there through planning and zoning and through people telling them, they could because they didn't understand the ordinance or whatever. And it just seems to me like we can't continue to violate the residential ordinance in Spanish Valley by allowing short-term rentals. Is that enough to be compelling enough that we establish a moratorium right now until we can figure out what to do in the future? I don't know.
Well, I guess I'm not clear on what you're what you would be stopping, because under the current ordinance, they're not allowed.
Yeah.
It would just be a matter of taking enforcement action against those that are.
Well, I think, I don't know.
Well,
I hate to say this publicly, but I think maybe somebody comes in with
Chime in here, but
a building permit request and says, this is my residential house, but they build it big enough for a short-term rental, and then all of a sudden there's a short-term rental
So
in that residential permit.
I said I wasn't going to say anything, but I think it's really simple, folks. I think you need to adopt an amnesty ordinance that captures those people who were told that they could build and did. Amnesty, one time, very narrow, doesn't encompass the entire world. And then alongside with that amnesty ordinance, you need to have a proactive enforcement program and not allow any other short-term rentals in there. I don't think it's any more complicated.
So anything that came before the Planning and Zoning Commission that looked like a short-term rental, for whatever reason, in residential, would be just automatically denied.
Well, interestingly, these didn't come before the Planning and Zoning Commission. The licensing official in that whole process is where all this came to light. So, but before licensing, your zoning administrator was also saying, "Yeah, I don't know, but I think you're all right." So,
And he's the one that issued the building permit?
the
We
building
didn't have the building permit until 2020. Or,
business licensing, no.
Who issues them now?
When you get your building permit, you don't have to say I'm doing this as a short-term rental. You're just building a residential structure. So the building permit itself wouldn't reveal that somebody is actually going to use that property for a short-term rental. But I think your amnesty ordinance and get on top of your enforcement, and you're good to go.
So I think this is a prime example of kind of what we were looking at is these two properties right here. So in our zoning ordinance, we have allowed in the Spanish Valley residential zone for property owners to subdivide their property from an acre down to a quarter acre. And so now you see that coming to fruition as a lot of subdivision requests are coming through planning and zoning. These specific properties or this one here is one that we're currently looking at right now is where they want to come in and split this in four, all for the purpose of overnight rentals. And so even though you're in the Spanish Valley residential zone, these people are still coming in, subdividing in anticipation of doing exactly overnight rentals in this area. And this was produced by a neighbor in the area where they walk through and they're like, this is Airbnb, this is Airbnb, and this is Airbnb. And when we look at that, and this is economic development staff will go through, they'll look at the business licenses. Well, who has business licenses and is allowed to have those Airbnbs? And if they are not, then they kick it to planning and zoning to make sure that this is allowed and it's not. And so they're stuck now with not being able to do anything with the business license because it hasn't been approved by planning and zoning, but yet the individuals out there are doing this on their own. But yet we've allowed them with a subdivision split. And so the moratorium kind of makes sense for us to get everything in line. If it's,
I think the problem with the moratorium, as Bart said, is the moratorium really isn't going to accomplish anything because they're not allowed anyway.
Other than it gives you time to, if you go down this road with the amnesty, and I know that one of our fellow residents from here last year tried that in the state legislature where he wanted municipalities to give Airbnbs amnesty for a certain period so that you get them all to come out of the woodwork. You make them legal. And then you close that window, and then anything beyond that is not prohibited. But it's kind of, I don't know, it's like your kids when they break a rule, and you're like, okay, never mind. It's okay that you broke this rule. We forgive you. Don't break it again. And they break it again because it's lucrative.
Bart, chime in on what he just said.
Bart, do you want to chime in?
I think, I don't know what the internal mechanism in the county would be. But it seems to me that a moratorium really isn't necessary here. It would just be some way to be able to tell who is doing this, and then it's just an enforcement issue, and then then just not approving any sort of business licenses in the future. And I think I think the county is doing that now for this activity in this district.
Yeah, and not, one purpose of a moratorium, it would at least let them know down there that, hey, we're getting on top of this, and you're just not going to be able to, build a house and start renting it out, because we're going to start enforcing this, getting our ducks in a row.
The issue with the moratorium is that standard, that compelling standard, is a very high standard to meet, and so you would want to make sure that your rationale for the moratorium meets that standard, because if it's likely to be challenged, which it sounds like it might be, you're going to want to make sure that legally you are meeting that standard.
And coincidentally, we already have that amnesty ordinance drafted, and had Bart take a look at it, and he made some changes to it, so that the amnesty ordinance is ready to go.
So what do we have to do to pass it? We have to go through a public hearing and all of
I
that
would.
stuff.
Yeah.
But it doesn't solve that problem with the resident that's sitting there that has all these Airbnbs around him and all these.
Right.
But that's the enforcement part, and I hear you loud and clear on the enforcement side of it. But
and honestly, some of these developers are fine there, because currently we just changed the ordinance. I think it was before for a code violation. It was, what was it, Lynn? It was like $100 fine or something like that. I mean, it was minimal. And I think we've changed it now to a couple $100 a day for each day. It's not up to a minimum of 3,000.
Max of 3,000.
Max
Yeah.
3.
But and some of these developers are saying, I'll pay 3,000, for a fine, and I'm making,
$1,000 a night.
200,000 a year
Yeah.
on this.
Yeah.
What's 3,000? And it's not like we can go back to the next year, because it's 3,000 total. So we could make the fines bigger, but to haul these people in and have a due process hearing and so forth, I mean, it's $10,000.
I have a question. We talk about taxes, and I don't know, I didn't understand for sure. They are not paying taxes? Those people are not paying taxes?
Well, there's property taxes,
So, I mean, that's what I mean.
and there's sales tax. Like
Yeah,
you
that's
go
what I
into,
mean, the
Yeah.
taxes on
And
the
I
money
mean-
they're making, they're not paying.
yeah, I don't know if they are or not, but
Very few.
I doubt they are, because
There are, so I counted this, I looked on the program this morning. There are 733 Airbnbs in San Juan County. 733. We do not have 733 business licenses to Airbnbs. So that's just
Probably don't have 75.
yeah. That was a question that I asked staff. Unfortunately, they're in blinding right now, but yeah, they're not. They're flying under the radar throughout the whole county, and you can. It's not just applied here. I mean, the Airbnbs are popping up everywhere, and like it was mentioned, they're prohibited in the rest of our zoning ordinance. Yet they're popping up throughout the county, and so it's not. I mean, it's here rampant because you're right next to Moab, and it's so lucrative. But it's
Does that include
It's everywhere.
Airbnbs within the cities, the municipalities? That's
no,
outside of the
they manage
municipal-
theirs. Yeah, they manage their own. This is all
So this 700 in the county.
in the county.
Well, this. So I try to figure out different ways that they can feel the pressure without putting the pressure. And I don't know how we can enforce they're not paying sales taxes, how we can enforce this and that, and if we start doing that way, maybe we will start correcting. Some people will probably start paying taxes and becoming a business, and when they apply for the license, then we cannot give them a license because that's an upgrade. So I wonder if the different combinations of things we can do. I know they probably don't have the main power, but who's in charge of collecting sales tax? And maybe they can start sending, no, according to your neighbor, you're operating this or whatever. You cannot make it that way. I don't know. I just trying to think fast.
Yeah.
Some of the
So do we develop the tattletale system?
Yeah, I'm good. I come from a country where we operate by tattletelling.
Well, and that's part of the problem is with the systems that we have, and we all know that some of the state legislatures are also in this business as well, and so they're going to be pretty protective of it, and so they have restricted counties and municipalities from using websites like the one we have, which shows, and you've seen some of the material today that Mitch had. It shows exactly what they're advertising, how much their nightly rates are. It shows pictures of the rooms that they offer, and the only plausible answer to this enforcement and the county not knowing who is out there running these is if the neighborhood files a complaint. If they notify us that, hey, we have this Airbnb, like this example that we're looking at right now this is from neighbor within the neighborhood that's walked around and said, this is an Airbnb, this is Airbnb, here's the problems. They're racing up down the streets with no stop signs. So you're starting to get what I'm seeing right now, which is kind of the scary aspect, is now the neighborhoods, because of the lack of enforcement and the ability to enforce, whether it's the sheriff or county staff, is you're starting to get vigilante justice where residents are going out and stopping these people in their razors or whatever and chewing them out, tell them to slow down and put the seatbelts on your kids. And so you're starting to get that type of a mindset because nothing's
I'm laughing
happening
because
with
I have a friend that she keep buying roosters
it. Totally.
to chase the
People.
the people that stay.
So does Mr. Carroll's petition qualify as
It does.
a complaint?
Yep.
Yeah.
So where we can
Okay.
start looking at these areas, but it doesn't stop. What we're seeing right now is these subdivision splits, because any property owner has the right to subdivide their properties into what minimum size is allowed, which is what they're doing. But it is all in anticipation, and I don't know if when we approve these subdivision splits within a zone that doesn't allow for overnight rentals, can we dictate on the plat map that this cannot be used for overnight rentals? And we start to enforce it on the plat so that developers and future property owners clearly know that at this time and date that these overnight rentals were not allowed in this zone. Because they're coming. I mean, literally, I have two of these on the planning commission that are three that are in this zone that are going to be on the planning commission, here on the next planning commission meeting.
All three of them in that subdivision we're talking about.
No, there's some, but some are closer down towards Tangren, that area down there.
One thing we can do is obviously, maybe task me to come up with, this is just a general and broad outline. Maybe look at how other cities are doing this, what their policies are. Maybe come back to you in a couple of weeks and, if I knew kind of what direction, whether we want to keep the status quo, whether we want to just say we're going to allow them, or we're going to shut them all down, or some other way, and maybe get that to you in a packet, let you look at it, and come back in a couple weeks.
Jamie,
So commissioners, just a couple of thoughts.
is his mic on?
Yeah, I like the amnesty idea, creating an amnesty policy, giving everyone time to get themselves legal, I guess. But I'm wondering if we can explore what's our relationship with the websites that these guys book through.
Those are the ones that we can't use. There's a specific law in Utah code that prohibits counties from using those websites
Really?
specifically, and it's an Airbnb.
And
It's
how
an overnight
that got
rental
passed,
code
I don't know.
that doesn't allow that.
It's saying we infringe on their First Amendment rights if we try.
So we'll find that state legislator there.
Yeah.
Something,
mean,
I don't know. But yeah, you can't use those
Can't
as the source.
see. Well, what I was gonna say is why can't we work on a relationship with those booking platforms? Not even
Yeah.
that. Huh?
Nope.
Okay.
Because
Well,
they're
I,
making the money.
Well, I
to-
think they're too big, and to them, I don't think they're really going to want to cooperate with us.
yeah.
So
Well, I'm for the amnesty draft. If we can look at that, and I'm interested in what that would look like, and maybe that gives us a time frame for what we have to try and resolve this. So.
one of the things that I like the idea of turn off the faucet. The water's running, so can we turn off the faucets as people come to the building planning and zoning commission with this kind of project? Have somewhere an understanding that when they're applying for this, they have to declare that this is not going to be, or it's for writing, this zone that you're building is not used for whatever. And we start stopping the,
So you're talking about the subdivision
the
process,
subject,
and
any new things that's coming to get a building permit.
but some of these are not coming through the subdivision approval process. They're just single lots that they own, and they're building the house on it. So
Yeah,
that's.
that's what I mean, when
Or
they're
a
building a
shanty.
house.
Yeah,
Shanty
beside
behind
the-
their house.
But I think he's right. You could use the subdivision approval process to restrict these kinds of uses. I think you can do that. That's you work with your attorney's office in that. But I want to talk about amnesty. So amnesty is a one-time, but it's a very narrow. So in March of 2021 is when the county attorney publicized and made official that short-term rentals were no longer legal. And so amnesty should go from approximately November 2019 to, March or April or mid-year of 2021. But somebody who started their project in 2022 or started it this year shouldn't be under amnesty, because the county has been very, very clear that short-term rentals were not approved within, and it's been public. It's been in your meetings. It's been through the county administrator. So it's out there. The county has been very official from March of 2021 on. So amnesty's good, and it should capture those people who were either misled or misunderstood prior to March of 2021. But after that, I think it should be probably your enforcement process to deal with it. So
Is
So-
that what your amnesty ordinance say, Mitch? Okay.
So how, and this is just me, the devil's advocate, and I don't know as much in law, especially when it gets into estoppel, but say the county has said no, and that individual is then allowed amnesty. Can they come forward and say, well, county, you guys were really screwed up. First you told me yes, then you told me no, and now you're saying, okay, yeah, it's allowed. From that period of time, I have lost $1,000 a night in this unit. And because of that, you owe me $1,000 times that time period of lost revenue. And now that's where I don't understand what estoppel is, and if that's part of estoppel, if they can come back and claim that now that you told me yes, told me no, now you're saying, okay, yeah, come in, is sometimes.
Well, part of that is we technically haven't we told them no, and then we told them yes, but we technically haven't told them no again. But anyway, let's defer to Bart on that. Bart, you still with us?
Yeah, I am. So estoppel would be where we told them yes, and then we told them no, and that they can't do it anymore. And then they would be arguing that they should be allowed to continue doing it because we told them yes. It's a different situation if we have someone who was told no, and then they stopped, and then you have the amnesty go out, and then they say, well, if I had just kept violating the ordinance, then perhaps I would have qualified for the amnesty. So now you owe me the difference in the rents. I assume the argument goes speculative, but that would all have to come down to the way that the ordinance was framed, and whether they were similarly situated to the people that the ordinance covered at the time. And I doubt they would be able to make that shown. But it would be on a case by case basis.
I think my concern with the amnesty aspect is, and we kind of seen it right there, when we started saying no, you had some developers come in and all of a sudden file for a business license for multiple properties throughout, saying, hey, I'm filing for a business license or a building permit now in anticipation that I'm going to be grandfathered, even though I can't build for 3 or 4 years now, but I'm going to do it to get under this radar. As you open the gates, sometimes they come flooding in, and how do we prevent that?
That would I think we would have to anticipate that and then handle that in the language of the amnesty ordinance to prevent that from happening. Okay. So that it just affects a very narrow range of people over a narrow range of time, and those select people in that circumstance would get the amnesty, but it wouldn't be a blanket amnesty for everyone.
Okay, for new.
Right.
So, and I'd like Bart to chime in on this a little bit. So, in the appeals ordinance of San Juan County, I have 2 roles. One is administrative law judge for appeals of final administrative decisions. I am also the code enforcement judge. And now, I've only had 1 case as your code enforcement judge, but fundamentally, I'm the end of the road for enforcement for your county. And I'm willing, and I'm looking at Bart here, whether this is a proper role for me or not, I'm willing to work with your county attorney and county administrator to provide input on what an enforcement process would look like, because at the end of the day, it's going to end up with me. So maybe we could report back to you in a more granular way on what enforcement looked like for those that are not captured by amnesty. And I think it involves lots of different things. It involves the subdivision ordinance. It involves how are we going to gather, how are we going to notice, what due process is involved. I mean, there's lots of things going on there. Because these, to be fair, these are people who own property. They're property owners, and they've moved forward with an enterprise in the county. So I think it's got to be a balanced thing. So, but I'm willing to do. Bart, is that appropriate role for me to be involved in that or not?
I think so. I think your help would be really beneficial.
Obviously, I couldn't have a specific case in front of me.
Yeah.
It would have to be generic, not specific. But so I'm willing to work with Mitch and Mac and Bart and bring you back an enforcement recommended process.
So is that separate from the amnesty role?
Yes, that would be separate.
So we need an amnesty ordinance to look at, and then we need an enforcement.
I don't know whether you need an enforcement ordinance. It would just be, this is what we're going to do under
Yeah.
existing
Okay.
authority. If we need to change the penalties, maybe we have to amend the penalty thing. We might came back to you and say, hey, please amend this penalty provision. Maybe that would be a small amendment, but let us bring you back something that looks doable. There's probably going to be costs involved, and so there'll be a budget assigned to it. This is not going to be free. So let's say it's going to cost you $50,000 or $40,000 or $20,000 or whatever it is. If it's going to cost you money, then you need to be aware of that and factor that in.
So, Lynn, while you're still there, I know one of the things that you noted and has been noted several times is the need to make sure that we have the skilled staff, the the staff that actually, has that background in planning. I noted that, and you can see it. It's kind of apparent where if you had somebody that was AICP certified and understands that role of planning, and I think that's an important aspect of this, is making sure that we have qualified employees at these key leader roles, and I see planning as one of those. But oftentimes that planning director is also tasked with that enforcement side of it. Can those two be married? I mean, we're not a rich county by any means, and
I fully understand that. So he and I have talked. There's two positions in your county that have legal weight on their shoulders: your HR person and your land use person. And there's so much legal nuance associated with that two areas of the law. You have to start with saying, hey, we're going to make mistakes, but just because they're going to be out there. Mm-hmm. But the more mature and experienced HR person and land use person you have, you reduce the number of mistakes you make. It doesn't mean they're going to go away, but you reduce the number of mistakes you make.
I concur.
And it's very hard to get people to apply for those jobs, qualified people to apply for the job.
Right.
And so,
Yep, I agree, but I think some of that can be offset. And Lynn's probably more than a full-time position this last year, just on appeals. And, going through some of these corrective measures. I'm thankful for Bart. Bart has been, for us, godsend, because he has literally gone through our ordinances just like Lynn, just like Mitch's. Bart's he's been our ad nauseum reviewer of the new ordinance, just so that we can try to get out of some of these messes that we're in. But a lot of it, goes back to the staff. I think if we spend the money in the proper employee that's well qualified at this, then, kind of like Lynn mentioned, it may not all go away, but it sure will help.
and I agree with that, because when we don't have the qualified person, it's a ripple effect for everybody in the county.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can save lots of high blood pressure from Mac all the way down to the commissioner, everybody, as if we have
No, the
somebody that we can.
commissioners are up. From
Into
Mac up to the commissioner.
Whatever, up and down, stress. And I agree that
What would,
Unqualified.
just a question, what would it do if we, in your example there, Mac, where I think the zoning is allowed, you can have 4 lots to an acre, I think, is that, if we just moved it back up, you can only have one lot per acre.
You could change that subdivision ordinance in
But
in
would
there.
that do anything? I mean, it would obviously curtail maybe a young family from wanting to buy a smaller home in that
Mhm.
area. They'd have to buy a whole acre instead of, now they could buy a quarter acre.
Yeah, yeah.
But that would limit some of the,
Or yeah, or just that message that you cannot do it in this zone.
Yeah.
I think because we allow for it in other zones, it doesn't mean that a speculator can't come in here and do a bunch of spec homes and sell those out for affordable housing. And so I wouldn't want to take that away in this type of area.
yeah.
You talk about urban infill, you want a higher density, and I know that some of the public hate the density when you get into a conversation about water, but when you get into a conversation about affordable housing and trying to match a balance, and I think that's one of the things that's also missing in this ordinance is the protection of a long-term rental or a protection of affordable housing, because as you have all of the developers and the speculation coming in, purchasing, the low-hanging fruit. I mean, they're coming in, they're buying the modulars that are out there now, ripping out the modulars so they can subdivide into 4. And so we need to find a measure that we can protect some of these affordable homes and keep them in there. Because I mean, if you go into this area right now, you can pick up a modular for about $400,000. That's a modular home. And so that's not right, but 450.
One across the street from me.
Yeah, and see,
750.
Wouldn't sell his house.
700.
He just paid
It's,
$200,000 for it.
yeah,
He's retiring at 50 years old. He thinks he's rich, but he's not rich. That ain't no money nowadays.
yeah.
He makes money a year.
And so somehow we've got to protect those long-term rentals from transitioning into Airbnbs, because that's what we're seeing now, as well as if I have a long-term rental, I'll just convert it to Airbnb, because overnight rental, I get a property management company and I make bank, and pay them a little. And so there's definitely some fine tuning that I think we need to make in the new ordinance that still allows it, but we've got to do something in this SVR. And I think it starts with, we can let them subdivide if they want to subdivide, but put some spec homes on it and for sale.
Mitch, why don't you bring back your amnesty ordinance?
Okay.
And then Lynn, if you'll work with these other guys on an enforcement method, that'll give us a start.
Okay.
And then Mac, if you think we need to work on revise of the lot size ordinance,
Okay,
then
let's take
maybe
a look
we
at it.
can, I don't know if we can bundle all this together in one meeting or not.
Yeah.
But I don't know. And I think well, I don't know what else.
Okay.
I guess we'll just not do a moratorium
Moratorium.
at this time.
Okay.
I think from what I'm hearing, we already have basically a moratorium by
Saying it's
you
not
got to follow the
legal.
rules.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
do we need to, Mitch, you'll inform planning and zoning kind of what we've discussed today, or
Yeah.
need
between
to?
Mac and I.
We could talk to them about that.
Okay. This is probably not appropriate, so I'll do it anyway. What do you two guys think of the discussion today?
Can I just have,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
okay, I've lived in the subdivision since 2001. since these B&Bs have become so popular in my name's James W. Tibbetts. And my family goes back in San Juan County. I think my great grandfather applied for a marriage license in 1886. Anyway, it has gotten so out of hand. I've seen people go by my house 60 miles an hour. I've lost 3 dogs. Granted, I should have had them tied up. They just got out like dogs do. I think if, in fact, there is a moratorium, possibly, maybe you want to think about if the people do decide to come in and get their business license, San Juan County can get some money out of the taxes, but put provisions in there so after 10 o'clock, there needs to be quiet, because in fact, right now, people want to show up on vacation and have a good time. A lot of these people are completely out of control. Completely. Right now, San Juan County does not have a sheriff's deputy anywhere in the area. We'll take care of it on our own if we have to, like we used to back in the old days. If San Juan County can't provide a deputy, we'll take care of it. That'll get ugly. So I just hope you guys do the right thing. And as far as,
what do you think about what we've talked about today, an amnesty ordinance and an enforcement?
Right now, we know it's illegal, and they're doing it anyway.
Yeah.
So I think that's better than what we got now. But put provisions in there
Yeah.
that they have to be quiet, drive slow. There's going to be problems.
That sounds like a noise ordinance, almost.
You have a nuisance ordinance
Yeah,
that's
we already have
actionable.
one of those.
And if there's a
Do we?
complaint and it's an
Yeah.
ongoing nuisance.
Would noise be a nuisance then?
Yeah, they can file a nuisance complaint and
Okay.
they can deal with
All
it.
A lot of these people show up with multiple trailers with
Yeah.
multiple ATVs on them, and they're driving like maniacs. I have an ATV too. I keep it on the dirt, not on the pavement.
You'd have to see it to believe it.
Yeah.
We will bring
you-
all of those breadth of options, including nuisance and everything else to you and explain to you what it looks like. But let me warn you, all of that is not free. If you have a positive code enforcement program, you have to fund it and support it. It's not.
I
And
understand.
so it's doable, but it's not within your current budget.
If somehow it's not legal for the counties to research the B&Bs, hire some high school kid with computer skills. God knows they're all really good at it. You could probably quadruple your money on a high school kid
Get an intern.
and give them a job at the same time.
I thought,
Oh, God.
I thought,
You want
James is pretty well covered.
okay.
But yeah, I mean, it's just so out of hand at certain times that it's just, you wouldn't believe it. You just would not believe it unless you've seen it. What these people, they racing up, you stop them and ask them what they're doing. They say, I wanted to just come from California and ride my side by side. I told the one guy, I said, would you have to do it on the pavement in front of my house? And there's like 30 of them out there on their motorcycles and side by side. Why did you come clear from California? You could have done that at home. But,
Mitch?
Yeah.
What's the proper process to notify the sheriff's office about the nuisance ordinance? Because we've had other complaints of noise out in the Oak Meadows area and other places in the county, and the response that they're getting from the sheriff's department is, we don't have a noise ordinance, and so we can't do anything about it. But the nuisance ordinance covers that.
Right. And I think it's just some communication between the attorney's office and the sheriff's office of the heightened interest down there by the commission. The commission has now taken a heightened interest, and for them to be more aggressive with the nuisance
Okay.
ordinance and
And I know Brittany's online. Brittany, are you hearing what we're saying?
She may not be.
But anyway,
Yeah,
will you have some conversation with the sheriff's office about
Yeah.
this nuisance ordinance
yes, I will.
so that we can
Okay.
kind of refer those people that are giving complaints to individual commissioners? You know, this guy's running a generator and it's all night and keeps us awake, or
Right.
running his sawmill or whatever, or he's running his side by side up and down my street till 2 a.m. They can call the sheriff's office and file a complaint under the nuisance ordinance,
Right.
and then they can respond. It might take some time to get to Spanish Valley, but at least they can respond and be aware of it.
Okay, I will do that.
Okay. Any other comments by the commissioners?
No,
You okay with?
thank
Okay.
you.
Washington, Washington County just recently went through their overnight rental policy and ordinance. I think they placed a moratorium on it, so we might want to look at them. You know, I know that they have some rampant problems as well, so that might be a good place to look as well to help us out.
Okay, we really appreciate everybody being here, and I think we made some real progress today. I'm optimistic.
Thank you so much for.
And thank you for coming from all the way from Spanish
Thank you. Thank you.
Spanish Valley.
Giving it a shot.
Thanks, Bart.
Nice to meet you.
That gives me
I
good.
like that you answered your
Pleasure.
phone.
This idea of incorporation is really necessary, but it does take a long time in the process. The process is very
Yeah, I
intense.
wasn't sure.